It works on my machine. That was the catchphrase to life before local development tooling became a thing. I can still feel the pain, right? It took way too long to get new developers onboarded. It took many senior people to do it. There were countless hours that were just wasted chasing down bugs that were just, conflicts and, environment conflict issues. And the really frustrating part is that tools like DDEV have been around for almost a decade now. And you'd be surprised how many people aren't using local development tooling still, or at least aren't using them to the extent that they should. And it got me thinking, why? Like, what is going on? Like, what are they missing? And, maybe what am I missing? Hello and welcome to Tag1 Team Talks, the podcast by Tag1 Consulting. I'm Michael Meyers, the managing director at Tag1, and today I'm joined by Mauricio Dinarte, a software architect and data migration expert, and the author of Tag1's comprehensive hands-on guide to data migrations. Together, we're going to dig into local development environments, why they matter, how they help developers and teams, the tools that make it easier, a brief overview of DDEV, the features that we love and use all the time, why people aren't using them, and the rise of cloud-based editors and what that might mean for the future of development and local development environments. But first, a quick plug, because this podcast wouldn't exist without Tag1. Tag1 is the number 2 all-time contributor to Drupal, the world's second most popular CMS. And for almost 20 years now, we've led the development of many of the features and best practices that millions of websites and several 100,000 organizations depend on every day. And while Drupal's at our core, we're a full-service technology partner from discovery and design to building and scaling complex applications, managing infrastructure, and performance tuning across a wide range of technologies and platforms. Organizations including Google, the New York Times, and the City of London trust us to solve their mission-critical problems. To learn more, reach out to info@tag1.com. That's TAG1.com. Mauricio, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like every time I talk to you, you are somewhere else in the world, running around, talking at events and conferences. Where are you today?
By the time this podcast comes out, it will be very close to DrupalCon Vienna, and I am slowly making my way there,
Awesome.
jumping from place to place.
Yeah, I love it. So, quick confession before we get started. When was the last time you caught yourself saying, "It works on my machine"?
Yesterday? Yes, it was for a very pesky migration issue, which in the end didn't have anything to do with migrations. But after a good debugging session, we were able to pinpoint the issue, and actually DDEV was instrumental in providing the tools to be able to resolve the problem.
So, for those who aren't familiar at a high level, what exactly is a local development environment?
For the most part, we want to replicate the same environment that our production site is running on our local machines. That means same version of PHP, which is what Drupal runs on, depends on, database servers, web servers, and so on. But just as I alluded before, sometimes things do not go as expected, and you may need extra tools. And DDEV provides debugging, profiling, and database and email tools for inspecting them, and that is part of what we will be discussing today.
Yeah, there's a lot of different reasons that you would use a local development environment. From a developer perspective, as an individual, there are a lot of benefits. Let's say, you're typically working on, multiple projects at the same time, personal stuff, different client projects, Drupal contributions. There's different, versions of PHP or databases potentially in the same project. That's a pain in the ass to deal with and manage. How do local environments help with that?
Um, for one, you can easily change from one version to another for each of these dependencies that I mentioned before. Uh, in my daily work, I spend a lot of time doing migrations, for example, from Drupal 7 to Drupal 11. And the version of PHP is one of the things that change between the two, like the minimum requirements. Sometimes the version of the database servers are also different. So even while working on the same project for the same client, I need to have two different sites with two different configurations, and a local development environment allows me to meet those requirements without having to spend too much time, thinking about it. It's literally a configuration file. I specify the PHP version that I need, the database version that I need, run the dev start, and I'm ready to go.
When you're working as part of a project, and doing development locally before you, contribute to a hosted environment, a shared environment with the team, it's critical that you debug your software, right? You don't want to derail the team. Yet, getting up and running with a lot of the debugging tools and software, again, can be really challenging. How does a local development environment tool make that easier?
Um, for local development environment, it really depends on the tool that you're using. In the case of DDEV, it has fantastic integration with Xdebug, with XXProf, which are debugging and profiling tools respectively. And it even goes beyond that. Recently, they added what is called HHGUI, which is a web interface for visuals for profiling. And there is a plugin that is called SPX that is yet another level of visually seeing the performance of your application. And just taking a step back, having the tools is one thing and using the tools is something different. The benefit of having a local development environment is that I am one click and one command away to be able to use them. For example, if you're using PHP Storm, there is something called zero configuration for debugging. You literally click a button on an IDE and you issue one command for DDEV to start the Xdebug session, and set a breakpoint, ready to go. So the time between finding a problem and being able to start debugging the problem, it's pretty much zero, seconds to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I remember development, back when I did a lot of development, before there were local environments, getting up and running with XHProf, that required expertise. It wasn't easy to do that on your local machine. It's awesome that, these tools support these features and functionality. Does it just work out of the box? How easy is it to add it? Like, put this into context. Like, we're talking about really robust functionality. Is it still hard to make it happen?
Um, it could if you are not using tools like this, and it also depends on your expertise. Just as an anecdote, when I started with web development more than 15 years ago, I would literally spend a couple of days just trying to set up, the requirements to run a Drupal website. Today, tools like DDEV gives you a quick start guide. You paste somewhere in the like 7 commands, and 5 minutes later, you have a fully working development environment, not only with PHP, database, web server, but with all these extra tools that we are discussing today.
Wow. Yeah, we had Randy Fay, one of the project leads for DDEV on a couple months back. And I mean, literally minutes to get up and running, and I'm not, I haven't done a lot of development in a very long time. Like, even a non-technical person could spin up a DDEV environment by following a checklist in 5 minutes and have a local environment running, to, work with and play with, Drupal CMS or something. It was crazy easy. Um, Testing, we talked about debugging and things like, XHProf, testing is critical to catching issues early in the process. Um, what kind of tools, are there for this? And, how is it helping on that front?
Okay, so to get started, you have uh, database GUIs to be able to connect to the database either via a web interface or your personal client of choice. And by doing that, you know, especially with a migration, you can see the source data at the database level. And if something is not coming along as expected, you can detect it from there. Another area that it is common is email. So DDEV comes with a tool called MailPit, which basically captures all email by default. Depending on how you set up your site, you might need to take some extra configuration steps, but in a common configuration, it is enabled and configured out of the box. So we have database and email, but then depending on your circumstances, You can do, PHP unit testing or coding standard checks. You can do static analysis. There are plugins, for example, to integrate with browser scene or other frameworks that allows you to, test your front end or test your API. Just to plug another Tag1 product, we have a product called Candor, which is for performance. And there is a DDEV plugin, which we created, that will install the tool to be able to do that performance checks automatically.
These are the kinds of things that you need infrastructure teams, DevOps teams. Like when we set this up for, development staging production in a hosted fashion, like this requires a tremendous amount of expertise and configuration. And, a local development, tool is providing this, out of the box in minutes for your local usage. But I think one of the things that I'm really interested about is, there are many benefits and, we'll get into this shortly, to these local development environments, but a big one is addressing, consistency of environments so that you're developing an environment that's very much like a production environment. But in modern web applications, the production environment is crazy complex. You have caching layers, you have search engines, you talked about mail. Like, can it really replicate what's going on in production and have all of those services, or are we still working in like a microcosm of, like an approximation of the environment?
In many cases, you can literally replicate the configuration as production. If we talk about caching, Memcache, Redis, Varnish, all of those services are available. For example, within DDEV. Search, if you are using Apache Solr or Elasticsearch, that is also available. For other services like S3, you might not have S3 directly in your local environment, but there are add-ons that will give you an equivalent API so that you can use them. There is one called Menu. So there is a DDEV plugin for that, and that is going to give you a S3 equivalent API so that you point your local environment to that, and you can expect that it is going to behave as the real thing.
That's amazing. It's really, really powerful that you can do that. So it's not just developers that benefit from this, and it's not just about trying to replicate production environments. There's a lot of other things going on here. From an organizational perspective, from a team perspective, there's a lot of things that it helps with. In particular, like, one of the challenges, that we both talked about is, getting a new developer set up and running. Historically that took a tremendous amount of expertise. Senior people needed to onboard the person. It was time consuming. Um, how does this tooling make that process faster and easier?
One way is that it is usually do it once, configure it properly once, and then just reuse. Normally, a senior developer can set up everything that is going to be needed, provide instructions in a README file, and then anybody on the team can follow them. And I want to highlight that this is not only for technical people, because again, we're focusing on DDEV, but similar tools, you can follow a set of instructions, and as long as you have, Docker and DDEV installed, you're going to have a copy of the site running locally in which you can do your local manual testing, for example, if that is what you are up to.
It really democratizes the technology. You can work in marketing and, if you want to practice or work on content creation or something as part of a migration process. Yeah, there's really no end to how you can use these tools. And one of the cool things that we do with like infra ops for a lot of our clients is we sync back production changes. So if we're making caching layer changes or adding infrastructure or just, tweaking a config file, it's critical that gets propagated back out to everybody on the team and their local development environments. So, things stay in sync. And so there's this whole sort of infra ops, tool chain cycle that ensures that you not only, can get up and running with this tooling, but that it continues to stay in sync. So don't reintroduce some of the fundamental problems that it's trying to solve. Some of our clients dictate, you have to use this laptop, like we're issuing you a physical laptop, or some dictate, you need to use certain technology and tools, for various different reasons. But most of the time, we let our developers use whatever tools and technologies that they love most. And we have people on, Macs, we have people on Windows PCs, we have people running Linux, all sorts of different tooling. And so, it's a pretty complex and diverse setup. Um, how does the local dev tooling work across all of this, and provide any benefit in doing that?
I think for this we need to take a step back from DDEV and notice that DDEV works on top of Docker, and Docker is multi-platform by itself. So this is the layer that allows us to go from one operating system to another with very little friction. In terms of what specific local development setup you use, in the case of DDEV, um, one setup, because it is running on these Docker services, which are compatible with many different platforms, they are just going to work. One thing that I want to highlight, and probably this is going too deep into the technical parts of things, but one thing that I want to point out is when Apple released their new M series of processors, they had a fundamentally different architecture than before. We're talking about ARM versus x86. And for probably about a year, there were some images for databases, for example, that were not readily available. So, generally speaking, and as of today, you have pretty much cross-platform compatibility among multiple platforms, operating system, and such. But if there is something new, there might be a time to adapt. And in some cases, it is not DDEV itself. It is like Docker or the underlying infrastructure that need to be cut up. But even that is a relief, because DDEV is always on top of these things. They are, trying things ahead of us, making sure that they work, and providing compatibility layers if necessary.
Clearly, this provides a tremendous amount of benefits to organizations. We could probably do a whole show, and maybe we should, on the organizational benefits of this tooling. Streamlining, getting up and people running. Making the development process faster, reducing errors. Reducing the support burden, and so on. It helps developers individually a lot of challenges. There's tremendous benefit for organizations to support and invest in it. We've talked a lot about the sort of development use case for open source projects and for, development inside an organization or an agency for clients. I want to ask about another use case, which is, beyond, that kind of day-to-day development in that context. Um, are there other benefits and ways of using these kinds of local environments?
Yes, one thing that you may know is that I am passionate about teaching, and I use these tools for trainings. So one example, I will do a migration training. I prepare a repository in advance with two sites, one for 777, one for 1111, everything configured, run 5 commands, 10 commands, and then you have a fully working Drupal 7 site with a database ready, pre-populated with user-uploaded files, and a Drupal 11 site that is already installed and ready to execute the migration. And one of the things that I really like about these tools is that you can get things out of the box. And if that is all that you want, excellent. That's most of the time what I do. But if you really want to deep into the tools, like tweak them, configure them, they are an awesome abstraction layer on top of the underlying infrastructure. But in the end, you have full control. So you can customize them to the extent that you need. But going back to the case of training again, like before, I remember like at DrupalCon, either for the trainings that are offered as part of the program, or during contribution sessions throughout the conference, we need people to have a local environment, and we will literally spend precious time, like 2, 3, sometimes a full morning, just getting the tools set up. and then start contributing or start teaching the training. Now that we have these local development environments, we can either do it quicker or let people know in advance that you need to come prepared with these tools, which for the most part is install Docker, install DDEV, and we will do the rest during the conference. And that makes things a lot more productive, and we make better use of people's time.
It's a really great abstraction layer. You did something similar with the data migration ebook. It is a book, and it walks you step by step through the process. And the same thing, like, you don't need to know a lot about the underlying technology. You can just install it in minutes and walk through the tutorial and learn about, the migration process and not have to worry about every other aspect. It really, I mean, it enables people to do things that you might not be able to do otherwise, from a development standpoint. You mentioned like Gander and the DDEV plugin. A lot of organizations don't have that kind of tooling set up, but there's tremendous benefit to running it locally. And so even if your organization can't, make it happen at the infrastructure and team level, you can still benefit from these tools and capabilities and ensure performance and scalability of your application as you do development. So it's really interesting that in some ways it's more powerful than what you might have on production and easier for you to get up and running. And I think that's another great use case that people should consider is there are features you should be adding to your development process and tool chain that might not be used, holistically as an organization. Um, we're going to dig more into DDEV, but there are many tools out there that do this. Just at a high level, what are some of the more popular local environment tooling?
Um, this has evolved over time, and just for the record, I want to give credit to Jeff Gerling for many years of supporting Drupal VM, which back in the day was based on VirtualBox. Nowadays, the most popular tools are Docker based, and in that area for Drupal specifically, we have like three big ones. DDEV is one, second, Lando, and Doxel. There are more, but those are the most popular based on some developer surveys that are run by the Drupal community.
And is there a clear leader, or is usage really fragmented?
Based on the 2025 results, DDEV is the most popular, and Lando is the second one. When they break down the results, they point out that in some cases there are some countries that have a preference for one tool or the other, um, or depending on the team size. If you have a bigger team, you might notice a bigger need for this kind of tooling. So in those cases, there is a preference to one or the other. But otherwise, they are pretty close in terms of usage.
Um, I remember historically DDEV was, by far the most popular. And what was interesting is that it was also the least hated. So if you looked at other tooling, in this response survey, there were, say, Homebrew might have, 72% likes, but almost 30% of the people really disliked it. And DDEV had, 93% of people loved it. Very few people were not a huge fan of the tool. So it was, had a really strong recommendation. And I think you can see that in the community. We sponsor a lot of different open source projects and tools. And the DDEV to me, like people email me, every once in a while, like, thank you so much for supporting DDEV. And I'm like, no one does that for, the other platforms that we're doing. There's this amazing, passionate community behind it. And I think that's, it's reminiscent to me of like, Drupal and the Drupal community and the passion that you see there. We're big fans of DDEV, which is, why we financially support it. We use it as a team. There are a lot of tools, but, for the sake of making this easier and clear to talk through, in the context of DDEV, can you give a deeper sense? Like, we talked a little bit about the features and functionality. But like, what does it offer? Like, why is it that developers really love, and these tools?
Yeah, so again, the DDEV is a Docker-based solution for local development environment, and it supports multiple languages. We are probably talking a lot about Drupal today, but it actually not only supports PHP, it also supports Node.js, it also supports Python. Um, Being able to support multiple languages means that it can also support multiple frameworks. Drupal and WordPress comes to mind. I am usually switching between the two, but Typer 3, Craft, Flask, Laravel, you name it. If it runs on one of the supported languages, you pretty much can have it working in DDEV. And in fact, they offer quick start guides for, I would say, no, this is always evolving, but the last time that I count, it was 27, and they are constantly adding more. This is one of the greatest benefit. All that tooling that I use for Drupal, I can switch to WordPress just by, you know, changing a configuration file and being able to know that it exists, that I can rely on it, being familiar with it. It's very powerful. But beyond the technical part of DDEP, I think that one of the highlights is that it has outstanding community support. Both Rantify and Stas, which is the other maintainer, it's incredible. It's like they are always there for you, and that level of support, it's one of the best I have seen in my whole development career.
Docker is something that's come up a bunch of times now. Um, One of, DDEV's, biggest wins in particular is hiding a lot of the complexity of Docker while still sort of giving users flexibility and keeping that power. Um, you know, how does it achieve that balance?
Um, I guess they want to serve as many people as possible. And speaking about Docker, you can have multiple providers depending on your operating system. For Mac you can have the official Docker desktop or Overstack, Lima, Rancher desktop, Colima. Some are commercial products, some are free, some are open source, like a wide variety. But in the end, DDEV is trying to support as many as possible. In Linux, for the most part, is your native package manager is going to get what you need. For Windows, you can have Docker Community Edition, Docker Desktop, and like at some point, we talk about, and we will discuss in more detail later about web IDs or web environment. And GitHub Code Spaces is yet another environment which is mostly web-based in which DDEV can run on.
As far as the development process goes, a lot of organizations are using some sort of cloud-based hosting platform, whether it's internal or through a provider like a Pantheon platform, SH, which just rebranded as Upsun, Acquia, Amazy. Like there's so many options out there. Similarly in the WordPress community, um, you know, does DDEV provide any sort of specific integration with these? Does it make life easier when you're working with a platform provider, or does it not extend to that?
Yes, yes, of course. So let's give a specific example with Pantheon. Um, you can log into your Pantheon account, create what is called a token, an authentication token, and there are, this is all well documented. There is a file in which you put that token, and basically that's what you need to do. From then on, you do, DDEP, Pantheon, get, you can get the database, you can get the files. Usually, it is recommended that you only download from Pantheon to your local environment. If you want to shoot yourself in the foot, you can also push your local databases and your files upstream, but that is generally a bad idea. But again, ultimately, you have the choice. It is copy one API key, one token, and then you have the commands to sync up and down databases and files.
So if I'm using DDEV, for my local development, um, what are some of the really powerful things that it enables me to do as a developer, right? We talked about project setup, it makes it super easy to run different versions of PHP, web servers. What are some of the other capabilities that I can expect?
Yeah, from in terms of setting up your environment, again, a configuration file, couple of tweaks, you're ready to go. One thing that I want to highlight, and this is just a testament on the extra mile that the maintainers put into the project. At some point, in terms of database servers, MariaDB and MySQL, basically MariaDB introduced a breaking change versus what MySQL would normally do, and DDEV created a compatibility layer so that if you import or export your database via the tools that DDEV provides, um, it doesn't matter if you were affected by that breaking change. So again, like we can sometimes oversee these kind of things because they just work, but there is a very thoughtful process in making them work under very different circumstances, even when a product produce a breaking change or introduce a breaking change. Beyond the basics, beyond what it is a hard requirement, we said, you have database GUIs if you want to interact with the database. Adminer is one of them. PHP is another one. These are web-based. You can also install, let's say, on your local computer, SQL Ace for macOS, and DDEV gives you a command that if it detects that SQL Ace is available, it will not only open the program for you, but it is going to pre-populate the connection string so that it is ready to go. You see your tables, you can start working directly with the tool, or you can do a DDEV describe, get information, get the connections yourself, and use whatever other tool that you might want to use on your local. For email, we said it comes with something called MailPit, which is going to capture your your mail out of the box. And again, the tools are always changing. Before we had MailHog that went unsupported, they replaced it by MailPit, and you can just rely on something available for your needs. On a Drupal day-to-day basis, you can execute rush commands. You can use Node if you need to compile your theme. You can use Terminus, for example, if you are integrating with Pantheon to interact with your Pantheon site within DDEV. Something that I want to highlight in this part is that something that is not often talked about, but DDEV allows you to have a fully working local development environment with very little tools set up on your local machine. For example, you can develop for Drupal without having PHP in your host. If you want, you can only have PHP inside of the DDEV container, and that's that's fine. That works. It might be because of security. You don't want to have programs that you are not using, yet you still need to develop locally. So a lot of power and flexibility with the things that you can have available within the DDEV itself. Um, in terms of debugging, we said XDebug, XSprof, XSGUI, all of that is available out of the box. If you want more advanced features like SPX for profiling, that is literally one DDEV command away to install the add-on, and then another one to turn on or turn off the feature itself.
I love the name Mail Pit. They did a great job at that. Also a good example. You talked about you used to be one tool, now it's Mail Pit. New tools are constantly being introduced. In the Drupal world, we have modules. In the WordPress world, we have add-ons or plugins. DDEV is also extensible, right? And a lot of these things that you mentioned are add-ons. And I would imagine, other local development environments have similar things. In addition to, some of what we talked on, just, some brief mentions, what are some of the other add-ons that you are regularly relying on?
Something that I started to use recently is add-on for AI-assisted development, um, which is basically integrates cloud code within the. And again, that is something that you can do manually yourself, but there is something already available that will do it for you. That said, it will really depend on your project. For example, uh, if you are working on databases, we talk about MySQL, MariaDB. You can have Postgres, you can have SQLite. There are add-ons for MySQL Server from Microsoft. There are add-ons for MongoDB if that's what you're using. Um, Search, Apache Solar, Elasticsearch, OpenSearch, for testing, there are plugins for Selenium standalone Chrome, Browser Sync, Cypress, RaidWrite, and other infrastructures or in different categories. We have Redis, Varnish, Memcache, RabbitMQ, Minio, which is the one that I talk about being an S3 compatibility layer, Tailscale, which is a router/VPN. There are the specific add-ons for Drupal development. There is one called Drupal Contrib, which it's going to give you a lot of the tools that Drupal developers use to contribute code back to the community, especially around static analysis and code reviews.
I think the biggest thing that I've struggled with is, you could listen to 10 minutes of this podcast and walk away thinking, these are awesome. Right? These tools are so amazing in what they do, solve so many problems, provide so many economic benefits. Um, I want to talk for a few minutes about like why people aren't doing this or why they're doing it, but not really leveraging it, anywhere near to its capabilities. And I understand that there are use cases where it just isn't possible, right? Like we work with a large Fortune 500 company that had massive security restrictions, right? They issued corporate laptops to everybody. They were locked down. You couldn't install anything. And if you wanted to get something approved, something so simple as an editor, just a single program, an IDE, it was a multi-month process, a whole review board. I mean, it was intense. And so, local development just wasn't possible out of the gate with that organization. And, those policies were extreme. And over time, we helped them understand, web development more clearly and, a better approach to things. And things did get better over time, but out of the gate, for the first, say 6 to, 10 months, we had no choice but to do things with, things like on, web-based editors. But that is, hopefully an edge case. And again, they moved on, over time with our support. Most organizations can do this. And yet we see that they aren't. Why? What are you seeing?
Um, from conversations that I have with other community members, sometimes I hear that organizations give the opportunity or the liberty to the developer to choose whatever they want. Some, you know, will use DDEV, some will use Lambda, some will use something completely different. And point being, it is great to have a choice, but it is also less efficient. We go back to the problem, it works on my machine, and it also doesn't work on my machine. So for one, being too flexible without providing some guidance, some basic guidance, can work against you. Another thing might be just like lack of knowledge of something like this exists. And DDEP tries to get the message across. And in my personal experience, I try to recommend this as much as possible because it saves so much time and so much heading that please make yourself a favor and use DDEP or something similar. Um, Another thing is that some people, they really want to have control over everything, and that is not bad in itself. But again, at least be open to trying something new, trying something different. That is one of the things they mentioned in the Drupal developer survey. Um, are you open to trying? Are you thinking of switching your local development tooling? So if you are not using anything, try something. We highly recommend it. But even if you want to have ultimate control, these kind of tools, for one, you can save you a lot of time, but also can serve as a learning experience. As I said, getting a Redis server, one command and it is working. And then you can study how DDEV configures it out of the box, all the different options that you can configure, and maybe you learn more that if you are trying to do everything from scratch.
We should retitle this episode, "It Works on My Machine, but It Doesn't Work on My Machine." I hadn't thought about that. It's a really interesting and challenging problem. But it seems like it divides into two main categories, individuals and their choices, and how they want to work, and organizations that need to better understand, the benefits of this tooling, and, why it's worthwhile to invest in, supporting it as an organization and providing it to their resources. And so, two big problems that, you know, I would think wouldn't exist at this point. This is by far a best practice, and hopefully over time, more and more people will see this. However, and I want to wrap up on this. There's potentially a big change in the works, or, not in the works, it's been around for a while. That could, just change the game here, right? Local development isn't the only way to do this. People are using cloud-based editors in different scenarios for different reasons. Um, what's your experience with cloud-based editors, and, how do you see people using them?
Okay, let's start with Drupal, which is what we know the most. Um, Now that Drupal.org has transitioned to GitLab, you have a fully fledged IDE available that on your browser. Nowadays, it is possible to work on an issue completely from the browser, and this is very empowering. Again, going back to DrupalCon contributions, uh, if you are working on documentation, you don't need to install a local development environment at all. You can work everything through the web UI. If you are doing manual testing, again, like you can use something like Simply Test Me, or there are also web-based versions of tools similar to DDEV that you can spin up and have the equivalent, but via the browser. Like in the browser, you have the editor. In the browser, you have the connection to the database, the web server, and everything. Um, that's Drupal. But even outside of Drupal, again, like it really depends on the tech stack that you need. There are some projects that are more suitable for web-based only development. For example, if you are using uh, React and you don't need a database, you're just connecting to an API endpoint. Um, it is easier in general. It's like less infrastructure that you need to account for, and it is easier to configure in a web only environment. And we have seen this over time. People maybe don't even need a laptop anymore. A tablet could do. I have seen people just for fun work on open source via from their phone, and being able to complete the full cycle of reporting an issue to fixing it, all from the phone. So ultimately, it is about being able to do it, having the ease of doing it, and yeah, local development is not the only option, and these tools are becoming more and more powerful over time. Before it was only the IDE. Now you can have a database, you can have a debugger, you can have basically what DDEV offers and what many of these tools offer directly in your web browser.
I mean, if you think about the benefits of the local development environment, in some respects, onboarding's even faster. You don't even need the 5 minutes to install DDEV. You don't need that powerful local computer. When you were talking, I'm glad you said phone, because when you were talking about this, oh my God, I could be like coding on my phone. That's amazing. And it also sort of, it democratizes technology. There are a lot of people in the world that have a phone, but may not have a powerful laptop. And so, having access to a web IDE with all these, capabilities enables so many more people to, access and participate in this, which is really amazing. Um, do you think that there's ever going to be a time, or, how far are we from the time where people aren't doing local development environment, or where there's an inflection point and, the majority of people are using more web IDEs than using local development environments. Do you see that happening? And if so, when?
Um, I can see this happening in the past, in the present, and in the future. A reference to the past, there are people just doing changes in production directly from the web server, and that is probably not a good idea, but it happens. Today, we have talked about a couple of alternatives in which you have a fully fledged environment directly from your browser. In the future, I can think of the evolution of AI and web-based IDEs that are going to give you all the tools that you need directly in the browser. When I don't think that we are too far from being able to do a lot of these things directly on the browser, whether it is suitable for every project. Probably, again, like something like a front-end JavaScript based project will be there faster than something like Drupal that will require a database. But again, even that is possible. So I guess I don't have a definite answer. I know that it is possible, and it's just going to get better and better over time.
Yeah. Think about AI assisted development, which is something that we do a lot of now, using it as a collaboration partner. That's, AI is very resource intensive. There are some models that work locally, but it's going to be some time before, you have the kind of power you need to do, development in partnership with AI locally. And so, it may be that, you're already dependent upon cloud services that you can't run locally. It's not like S3 where you can encapsulate it with with an API and a service. And so in some senses, these web IDEs, it's almost more native. You're already, you're already on the web. Why not use everything on the web? Um, Interesting. Well,
Yeah, this reminds me on something like browser sync. Browser sync is a tool that basically lets you temporarily lend a physical device for cross-device testing. And again, it really depends on your need. Do you need to support iOS? Do you need to support Android? Do you need to support, Firefox, Chrome, Edge, Safari? So the tools are going to be there. Whether you use them or not will depend on the needs of your project. And again, like the tools are going to be there depending on your project. You will be able to use them today or maybe tomorrow, or maybe in a month from now. But I am sure that there will be an opportunity and something for everyone at some point.
Mauricio, it was really great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you everybody for tuning in and listening. If you'd like to learn more about local development, we'll put a bunch of links in the show notes. Mauricio's favorite add-ons and information and links to some of the different development environments and tools that we mentioned. Please don't forget to subscribe to Tag1 Team Talks on your favorite podcast app or YouTube. If you have any suggestions, we love input, we love feedback. If there's something you want to see us cover, please reach out to us at info@tag1.com. You can check out our past team talks at tag1.com/TTT. That's 3 T's for Tag1 Team Talks. Mauricio has a great number of episodes for the ebook on data migration, and we'll include a link to that as well. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.